The volcanic moon of Ashara Prime glowed orange beneath the twin suns, and the human embassy stood like a silver needle against the black rock landscape that stretched for miles in every direction. Daniel Porter adjusted his formal collar and tried not to show his frustration as the Dracorian High Council members stared down at him with their golden eyes, their massive scale bodies filling the chamber with heat that made him sweat through his diplomatic uniform. "Your proposal for trade is noted," the eldest council member rumbled, smoke curling from his nostrils. "But humans have nothing we desire." Ambassador Porter. Daniel had heard these words many times in the 6 months since his family arrived on this hostile world, and each time they stung a little more because he knew his people needed this alliance desperately. The Dracorians were the most powerful species in the sector, their fire-breathing warriors and advanced technology making them invaluable allies. But they viewed humans as weak creatures from a small blue planet that barely deserved notice. "I understand your position," Daniel said carefully, "and I hope continued dialogue will change your perspective over time." The council dismissed him with a wave of clawed hands, and Daniel walked back through the obsidian corridors toward the human compound where his wife, Grace, and daughter Lily waited for him. Grace Porter was a xenobiologist who had jumped at the chance to study Dracorian physiology, but even she had grown tired of being treated like an insect under a microscope by the dragon-like beings who surrounded them. "No luck again?" she asked when Daniel entered their quarters, and his heavy sigh was answer enough. Their 7-year-old daughter Lily sat on the floor surrounded by paper, scissors, and her most prized possession, a large container of multicolored glitter that her grandmother had sent from Earth. "Daddy, look what I made." Lily held up a drawing covered in sparkles that showed their family standing next to tall dragon shapes with smiles on their faces. Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion, because Lily had not yet learned to see the Dracorians as enemies or obstacles. And in her innocent mind, they were simply neighbors who had not yet become friends. "That is beautiful, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to examine her artwork more closely. "I want to give it to a dragon," Lily announced. "But Mommy says I have to stay inside during the ceremony tonight." Grace shook her head firmly and said, "The hatching festival is a sacred Dracorian tradition, and humans are only allowed in the main courtyard, not the gardens where the celebration happens." Lily pouted but did not argue because she was a good child who usually followed the rules, though her curious nature sometimes led her into unexpected adventures. That evening, the embassy staff gathered in the courtyard to observe the hatching festival from a respectful distance, watching as Dracorian families paraded past with their young hatchlings who had emerged from their eggs during the past lunar cycle. The hatchlings were smaller than Lily had imagined, only about the size of large dogs, with shimmering scales in shades of red, gold, and deep purple that caught the firelight from the ceremonial torches. "They are so pretty," Lily whispered to her mother, her eyes wide with wonder as she clutched her bag of craft supplies that she carried everywhere. Grace nodded and kept a firm hand on Lily's shoulder. But then, a Dracorian elder approached Daniel with urgent questions about a supply shipment, and both parents turned away for just a moment. That moment was all Lily needed. She heard a strange sound coming from beyond the courtyard walls, a high-pitched chirping that sounded almost like crying, and her feet carried her toward a gap in the ancient stone barrier. Before she even realized she was moving, the sacred hatching gardens were beautiful beyond anything Lily had ever seen, with crystal flowers that grew from volcanic glass and pools of water that glowed with bioluminescent creatures. But Lily barely noticed these wonders because her attention was fixed on 3 small shapes huddled beneath a twisted tree, their scales dull with distress and their tiny wings pressed tight against their bodies. "Hello," Lily said softly, approaching the hatchlings with no fear in her heart. "Why are you crying?" The three young dragons looked up at her with startled eyes. And the largest one, a male with copper-colored scales, moved in front of his siblings protectively. "You are a human," he said, in a voice that cracked and wavered. "You should not be here. I heard you crying," Lily explained, sitting down cross-legged on the warm ground. "And I wanted to help." The female hatchling peered around her brother with curiosity in her silver-blue eyes. And the smallest one, a pale gold male who trembled constantly, hid behind them both. "We got lost," the female admitted. "And Mother will be so angry with us." Lily reached into her bag and pulled out her container of glitter, intending to show them something that might make them smile. But her small hands fumbled with the lid. And suddenly, a cascade of sparkling particles exploded into the air, covering everything within reach, including all three hatchlings. Young dragons froze in shock as the glitter settled on their scales, transforming their dull and stressed appearance into something magical and magnificent. "What is this?" the copper male breathed, staring at his own claws as they sparkled in the torchlight. "It is glitter." Lily laughed, delighted by how beautiful they looked. "It makes everything pretty." The silver-blue female began to dance, watching how the sparkles caught the light with every movement. And even the tiny gold male crept forward to examine the strange substance with wide eyes. "I have never seen anything like this," the female said with wonder in her voice. "I can give you more," Lily offered, holding out the container. "I have lots of colors." The hatchlings gathered around her, their fear completely forgotten as they examined the various shades of glitter with fascination that only young creatures can show for new discoveries. None of them noticed the massive shadow that fell over the garden until a voice like thunder shook the crystal flowers and made Lily's heart nearly stop. "What is happening here?" Virithax demanded, her enormous form blocking out the stars as she towered over the human child, who knelt among her hatchlings. Ancient Dragon Mother was magnificent and terrifying, her scales the color of dark blood and her eyes burning with protective fury that could melt stone. Lily looked up at the fierce Dragon Mother and felt tears prick her eyes because she had not meant to cause trouble. She had only wanted to help, but before Virithax could unleash her fire, something unexpected happened. The three hatchlings moved as one, positioning themselves around Lily in a protective circle, their small bodies standing between their mother and the human child who had shown them kindness. "Mother, no!" the copper male shouted, spreading his tiny wings as wide as they could. Virithax froze, her flames dying in her throat as she stared at her children, defending a creature she had been taught to despise. The ancient Dragon Mother had lived for centuries and had seen many strange things, but she had never seen her hatchlings choose an outsider as one of their own. And as the firelight danced across scales that sparkled with human glitter, Virithax realized that something had changed forever in this garden tonight. Virithax stood motionless in the sacred garden as her mind tried to process what her eyes were showing her. And for the first time in her long life, she did not know what to do. Her three hatchlings, Corvith the bold, Solara the curious, and little Nethrix the timid, had formed a protective ring around a human child who sat trembling in the center of their defense. "Please do not be angry," Lily said in a small voice. "I only wanted to make them feel better because they were sad." The ancient Dragon Mother lowered her massive head until her golden eye was level with the tiny human, and she could smell the fear radiating from the child mixed with something else she did not expect. There was no deception in this small creature, no malice or hidden purpose, only the pure intention of a young heart that had reached out to comfort strangers in distress. "Mother, she gave us sparkles," Solara said, spinning to show how the glitter caught the light on her silver-blue scales. "Have you ever seen anything so wonderful?" Corvith puffed out his copper chest proudly and added, "She was very brave to come here alone, and she shared her treasure with us without asking for anything in return." Even Nethrix, who rarely spoke to anyone outside their family, crept forward and whispered, "She has a kind voice." "Mother." Virathax straightened slowly and looked at the glitter covering her children. And despite her centuries of wisdom, she found herself uncertain about what should happen next. "What is your name, human child?" she asked in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "Lily Porter," the girl answered, clutching her bag of craft supplies against her chest. "And I am very sorry if I broke any rules." Before Virathax could respond, shouts echoed from beyond the garden walls. And Daniel Porter came running through the entrance with Grace close behind him and several Dracorian guards following Lily. Grace cried out, relief and terror mixing in her voice as she saw her daughter surrounded by dragon hatchlings beneath the shadow of their enormous mother. Daniel moved to grab Lily but stopped when Corvith growled a warning. And the human ambassador realized with shock that the young dragons were protecting his daughter rather than threatening her. "What is the meaning of this?" a deep voice demanded, and the crowd parted as Elder Thorax, the head of the High Council, swept into the garden with his advisors behind him. Virathax bowed her head respectfully and said, "My hatchlings wandered from the ceremony, Elder, and this human child found them and comforted them in their distress, and now they guard her as if she were one of their clutch," Thorax observed, his ancient eyes studying the scene with growing interest. The Elder circled around the group slowly, taking in every detail from the glitter on the scales to the way the hatchlings positioned their bodies to shield Lily from any perceived threat. "Do you know what has happened here, Virathax?" he asked finally. "I am not certain," she admitted, "but it appears similar to the old stories." A gasp rippled through the gathered Dracorians, and Daniel looked at his wife in confusion because neither of them understood what was unfolding. Thorax turned to address the crowd and raised his voice so all could hear. "In the ancient times, before our people became the power we are today, there were rare occasions when hatchlings would choose a guardian from outside their own kind," he explained. "This bond was called the choosing of the Bright One, and it was considered the most sacred of connections. But that has not happened in 1,000 years. One of the advisors protested. "And never with a human. The old laws do not specify the species of the chosen one," Thorax replied. "Only that the hatchlings must act of their own will, and that the chosen one must have a heart pure enough to accept the bond." Grace stepped forward carefully and asked, "What does this mean for our daughter?" "It means," Thorax said slowly, "that your child has been claimed as a sacred guardian by 3 Dracorian hatchlings. And according to our oldest traditions, this bond cannot be broken." Daniel felt his head spinning as he tried to understand the implications of what the Elder was saying. "Lily is only 7 years old," he said. "She cannot be responsible for dragon children. The bond does not require responsibility," Virathax explained, her voice softer than before. "It requires presence and connection. And the hatchlings have decided that this child possesses something they need." Corvith walked over to Lily and pressed his small head against her shoulder, and the girl wrapped her arms around his neck without hesitation. "I like them," Lily said simply. "Can they be my friends?" Solara chirped happily and nuzzled against Lily's other side, while Netherix cautiously touched her hand with his tiny snout. The gathered Dracorians watched in stunned silence as the hatchlings displayed affection they rarely showed even to their own family members, but not everyone was pleased by this development. A harsh voice cut through the moment like a blade, and General Scorvith pushed his way to the front of the crowd with fire burning in his eyes. "This is an abomination," he roared, his scarred scales rippling with anger. "A human cannot hold sacred guardian status among our people." Scorvath was the leader of the warrior faction, a powerful dragon who had fought in many battles and who hated humans more than any other Dracorian on Ashar Prime. "The old laws are clear," Thorax responded calmly. "The choosing cannot be undone. Then I say the old laws are wrong." Scorvath bellowed. How can we call ourselves the supreme race if we allow a weak human child to stand among our sacred traditions? Several warriors moved to stand behind their general, and the tension in the garden grew thick enough to taste of Virathax felt her protective instincts flaring as she looked at her hatchlings, still clustered around the small human girl. And she realized that she faced an impossible choice. For centuries, she had believed what Scorvath believed, that humans were inferior and unworthy of respect. But now her own children had chosen one of them. I must think on this, Thorax announced. We will convene the full council tomorrow to decide what must be done. Scorvath snarled, but did not challenge the elder directly. And instead he pointed one clawed finger at Lily and made a promise that chilled everyone who heard it. If the council does not remove this human from our sacred traditions, he declared, then I will remove her myself, and no ancient law will stop me. Lily pressed closer to the hatchlings, frightened by the hatred in the general's voice, and Corvith, Solara, and Nethrix wrapped their wings around her protective Elevachax, looked at the scene, and felt something shift inside her ancient heart. Because these were her children, and they had made their choice, and whether she agreed with that choice or not, a dragon mother would always defend her young and everything they held dear. The days that followed the choosing were unlike anything the Porter family had experienced since arriving on Ashara Prime. And Lily found herself at the center of a storm she could not understand every morning. Corvith, Solara, and Nethrix would appear at the embassy gates, chirping and calling until Lily was allowed to come outside and play. With them in the gardens, the Dracorian guards who had once ignored the human child now watched her with expressions that mixed confusion and something that might have been respect. They should not be here every day. Grace worried as she watched her daughter teaching the hatchlings to make paper flowers. What if General Scorvath decides to act before the council makes their decision? Daniel placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder and said, Virathax has posted her own guards around the garden, and I do not think even Scorvath would challenge a dragon mother protecting her young. It was true that Virathax had become a constant presence near wherever Lily and the hatchlings played. Though she kept her distance and observed rather than participating, the ancient dragon mother was struggling with feelings she had never expected to have. And watching her children bond with a human was both troubling and strangely touching. She makes them happy, her mate Dravik said one evening as they watched Lily spread glitter on a new art project while the hatchlings danced around her with excitement. Look at how Nethrix has come out of his shell. It was true that the smallest hatchling had changed dramatically since meeting Lily, and where he had once hidden from strangers, he now eagerly showed visitors the drawings that his human friend had made for him. Corvith told me something today, Virathax admitted quietly. He said that Lily taught him that strength is not only about fire and claws, but also about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Dravix rumbled thoughtfully and asked, Is that not what we have always taught him? Yes, Virathax replied, but somehow hearing it from a human child made him believe it in a different way. In the council chambers, debate raged between those who supported the traditional laws and those who sided with General Scorvath's faction elder. Thorax listened to arguments from both sides while keeping his own opinion hidden behind centuries of political experience. The choosing is sacred because it reveals truth, one ancient scholar argued. The hatchling saw something in the human child that we cannot see, and we must trust their judgment. Hatchlings are foolish and easily tricked, Scorvath countered. This human brought strange substances that enchanted them, and that is not a true choosing, but a deception. The mention of glitter made Thorax pause, because he had wondered about that sparkling material that now seemed to cover everything Lily touched. He ordered Grace Porter to appear before the council and explain what the substance was. And the xenobiologist nervously described the simple mixture of plastic and color that humans used for decoration. It is harmless, Grace assured them. Children on Earth play with it all the time. But then she hesitated and added something that caught everyone's attention. However, I have been running tests on the hatchlings with Verathax's permission, she said. And I discovered something unexpected about how the glitter interacts with young Dracorian scales. The council leaned forward with interest as Grace explained her findings. The minerals in the glitter seemed to bond with the developing scale structure. She continued, and my analysis shows that it actually strengthens the scales and improves their heat resistance by nearly 15%. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, because strong scales were considered a sign of health and power among the Dracorians. You are saying the human substance makes our young stronger? Thorax asked with surprise in his voice. The data supports that conclusion, Grace confirmed. Though more research would be needed to be certain. Scorvath slammed his tail against the floor and roared. This changes nothing, and I will not allow our sacred traditions to be corrupted by humans, regardless of what tricks they bring. General Scorvath, you will control yourself in this chamber, Thorax commanded, his authority silencing even the fierce warrior. The council will continue its deliberations, and no action will be taken until we reach a decision. But outside the council chambers, Scorvath was gathering his forces and making plans that did not require the council's approval. Meanwhile, Lily remained unaware of the political battles being fought over her future, and she spent her days showing the hatchlings all the human activities she loved. She taught Corvith to blow bubbles, which fascinated him until he accidentally breathed fire and popped them all at. Once she showed Solara how to braid flowers into crowns, and the female hatchling wore hers proudly despite the teasing from older dragons, who passed by, and she sat patiently with Nethrix for hours, reading him stories from Earth and watching his golden eyes grow wide with wonder at tales of places he had never imagined. Lily, Nethrix said one afternoon, his small voice gaining confidence with each passing day. Will you always be our friend? Always and forever, Lily promised, hugging the little dragon tightly. It was then that Nethrix spoke his first complete sentence in the common tongue. Words that he had learned not from his Dracorian tutors, but from the human child who had become his guardian. I love you, Lily, he said, and the words were perfectly clear. Verathax, who had been watching from nearby, felt tears gather in her ancient eyes because she had never heard Nethrix speak with such clarity and emotion the fierce dragon mother who had initially wanted to incinerate. The human intruder now found herself moving closer to where her hatchlings sat with their chosen guardian, Lily Porter, Verathax said, and the girl looked up with only a little fear in her eyes. Thank you for what you have given my children. Lily smiled brightly and asked, do you want to make art with us? And for the first time in her very long life, the ancient dragon mother sat down with a human child and learned how to spread glitter on paper. But their peaceful moment was about to end because as the sun set over Ashar Prime, Scorvath's warriors were surrounding the sacred gardens with orders to seize the human child before dawn. The general had decided that if the council would not act, then he would take matters into his own claws, and by morning, everyone would learn what happened when a dragon mother was forced to choose between her traditions and her heart. The night air on Ashara Prime crackled with tension as General Scorvath positioned his warriors around the sacred hatching gardens, their scales gleaming like armor in the light of the twin moons. Remember, Scorvath instructed his soldiers, the human child must be taken alive, so the council cannot claim we acted with barbaric violence. But anyone who stands in our way may be dealt with as necessary. Inside the gardens, Verathax sensed the danger before she saw it, her ancient instincts warning her that something terrible was approaching. Wake the hatchlings, she ordered her guards. and bring Lily to the central clearing where I can protect her, Daniel and Grace. Porter had been staying in a guest chamber near the garden since the choosing, unwilling to leave their daughter even though the Dracorian guards had assured them she was safe. When they heard the commotion, both parents rushed to find Lily already surrounded by Corvus, Solara, and Nethrix. The young dragons alert and bristling despite their fear. "What is happening?" Grace demanded, holding her daughter close. "Scorvath has decided not to wait for the council," Virithax replied grimly. "He means to take Lily by force and present the council with a situation they cannot reverse." Daniel felt cold rage building in his chest, because he had tried so hard to build bridges between humans and Dracorians. And now a warmongering general was threatening his child. "The embassy has sent a distress signal to Earthfleet," he said. "But they are 3 days away, and I do not think Scorvath will give us that much time. You should take your family and run," Virithax suggested. "I can hold the gardens long enough for you to reach your ship." But before the porters could respond, Lily spoke up with determination that surprised everyone. "No," the little girl said firmly. "I will not leave Corvus and Solara and Nethrix. And they are staying here, so I am staying too." The 3 hatchlings pressed closer to their human guardian, and Corvus declared, "We will not abandon Lily, our mother. So if she stays, then we all face this together." Virithax looked at her children with a mixture of pride and despair because she knew they were too young to truly understand the danger they faced. Then, "We will all stand together," the ancient dragon mother decided, and fire began to glow deep in her throat as she prepared for battle. Scorvus warriors breached the garden walls just as dawn began to color the sky, and they found not a frightened group of victims, but a wall of resistance they had not expected. Virithax stood at the front with her wings spread wide and her flames ready, and beside her stood her mate Dravix and a dozen loyal guards who'd chosen to defy the general's orders. "Stand aside," Virithax, Scorvath commanded as he strode through the broken gate. "This matter does not require bloodshed if you simply hand over the human. This human is under my protection," Virithax responded, "and any who try to take her will burn." The 2 dragons faced each other as the sun rose higher, and the garden that had been a place of peace and new beginnings now seemed destined to become a battleground. But then something unexpected happened as a shadow fell across the confrontation, and more dragons began arriving from all directions. They were mothers, dozens of them, carrying their own hatchlings who had heard stories from Corvus and Solara about the wonderful human who made sparkles and taught kindness. "What is this?" Scorvath growled, watching as the new arrivals positioned themselves behind Virithax. "We stand with our sister," one of the mothers declared, "because if the sacred bond of the choosing can be broken by force, then none of our children are truly safe. You are all fools." Scorvath roared, his patience finally breaking. "I will not be stopped by sentiment and tradition." He turned to Virithax and raised his head high, smoke pouring from his nostrils as he issued a challenge that silenced every other voice. "I invoke the right of ritual combat," he announced. "Single combat between us for the right to claim what each of us protects." Gasps echoed through the garden because ritual combat was an ancient tradition that could not be refused without bringing shame upon an entire bloodline. Virithax hesitated because she knew Scorvath was younger and had spent his life training for war while she had spent hers raising children, but she also knew that refusing would mean surrendering Lily, and that was something she could not do. "I accept your challenge," she replied, and the gathered dragons formed a circle around them as the ritual demanded. The battle that followed was fierce and terrible, with fire and claw and fang clashing as 2 powerful dragons fought for their beliefs. Scorvath was indeed the stronger fighter, and within minutes, Virithax was wounded in several places, her blood staining the crystal flowers beneath her feet. "Yield," Scorvath demanded, pressing his advantage as he forced Virathax back toward her children. Yield, and let me end this foolishness. I will never yield, Virathax gasped. But her strength was fading, and everyone could see that the end was near. Scorvath raised his claw for the killing blow. And the garden fell silent as death hung in the air between them. Then a small voice cried out, "Stop! Please stop!" Lily broke free from her parents and ran between the two dragons, her little body placing itself directly in the path of Scorvath's strike. Lily, no. Grace screamed, but it was too late to stop her daughter. Scorvath froze, his claws inches from the human child, who should have been cowering in fear, but instead was holding something out toward him with trembling hands. It was a piece of paper covered in glitter, a drawing that Lily had made the night before when she could not sleep because she was worried about all the angry dragons who seemed to want to hurt her. Friends, the drawing showed a large dragon with scars on his scales. But in Lily's picture, the dragon was smiling and surrounded by little dragons who were playing with sparkles and flowers. "I made this for you," Lily said, her voice shaking but clear, "because I thought maybe you were mean because you were sad. And my mommy says art can make sad people feel better." Scorvath stared at the drawing with an expression no one had ever seen on his battle-hardened face, and his claws slowly lowered as something broke inside his ancient heart. "Why?" he asked in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Why would you make something for me when I have tried to hurt you?" Lily looked up at the massive dragon who had terrorized her since she arrived on this world, and she saw something in his eyes that made her unafraid, because everyone deserves to have someone be nice to them. She said simply, "Even scary people." Scorvath's legs trembled beneath him as memories he had buried long ago came flooding back, and a sound escaped his throat that no warrior should ever make. The general, who had conquered worlds and burned cities, fell to his knees before a human child. And for the first time in decades, the fierce dragon wept. The sacred hatching gardens fell completely silent as General Scorvath knelt before Lily, his massive body shaking with emotions he buried for longer than most humans had been alive. Every dragon present watched in disbelief, because this was the warrior who had never shown weakness, who had led armies across the stars and brought entire civilizations to their knees. "You do not understand," Scorvath said, his voice broken and raw. "I had hatchlings once, 3 beautiful children who were everything to me." Lily moved closer despite her parents calling for her to come back, and she placed her small hand on the scarred scales of the general's face. "What happened to them?" she asked gently. "They were killed," Scorvath replied, "in a conflict with human forces near the border worlds. A battle that should never have been fought over territory neither side truly needed." A murmur passed through the crowd because few dragons knew this story, and those who did had never spoken of it out of respect for their general's pain. "I swore that day that I would never allow humans to hurt another Dracorian child," Scorvath continued, "and I have carried that hatred in my heart ever since, believing it made me strong." Virathax limped forward, her wounds still bleeding, but her eyes filled with understanding instead of anger. "Grief can become a cage if we let it," she said softly. "And sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become prisons that keep out the very things that could heal us." Scorvath looked at the drawing Lily had made, at the image of himself surrounded by happy young dragons, and he realized how far he had fallen from the father he had once been. "I cannot bring back your babies," Lily said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small jar of glitter. "But maybe you can keep this to remember them by, and whenever you look at it, you can think about how they sparkled." The general's claws trembled as he accepted the jar from the human child, and the warriors who had followed him into battle lowered their heads in shared grief for children they had never known. "I withdraw my challenge," Scorvath announced, his voice regaining some of its strength, though it carried a different quality now. And I begged forgiveness from Verithax and from this child who showed me compassion when I deserved none. Elder Thorax had arrived during the confrontation, and he stepped forward to address the gathered dragons with authority that silenced any remaining whispers. Let it be known that the choosing of Lily Porter is hereby recognized by the High Council, he declared. And let it also be known that on this day, our people have learned something about ourselves that we should never forget. The mothers and hatchlings who had come to support Verithax began to cheer. And even the warriors who had followed Scorveth joined in as they saw their general accept the small human child without hostility grace. And Daniel finally reached their daughter and wrapped her in their arms, tears streaming down their faces as they realized how close they had come to losing her. "You are very brave," Daniel said. "But please, never run toward angry dragons again." Lily smiled up at her father and replied, "He was not angry, Daddy. He was just sad and lonely in the days that followed." Everything changed on Ashara Prime as news of what had happened spread across Dracorian space. The story of the little human girl who had tamed the fiercest general with glitter and kindness became a legend at Hatchlings. Begged to hear at bedtime, Scorv became an unexpected ally to the Porter family, using his influence to support the human embassy and push for stronger relations between the two species. He visited Lily often, and she taught him how to make art while he told her stories about his own children and the happy times before the war took them Corvus. Solara and Nethrix grew stronger every day under the guidance of their two mothers. Verithax, who taught them Dracorian traditions, and Lily, who taught them human creativity. The hatchlings became the first dragons to receive formal education in both cultures, and their unique perspective would later help bridge many gaps between them. Species Grace continued her research and discovered that human creativity and Dracorian strength could combine in ways neither species had imagined. She developed programs where young dragons and human children learned together, and the first generation of truly integrated citizens began to emerge. Daniel finally achieved the alliance he had worked so hard for, and the treaty he signed became the foundation for centuries of cooperation. But for Lily, none of the politics or history mattered as much as the simple joy of having 3 dragon siblings who loved her and a fierce dragon mother who had chosen to let her heart guide her years past. And Lily grew from a child into a young woman, and then into a leader who carried the lessons of her childhood with her everywhere she went. On the day she was appointed as the first human Dracorian ambassador, she stood before the Galactic Council with Corvus, Solara, and Nethrix flanking her on either side. The 3 dragons had grown into magnificent adults, their scales still carrying traces of the glitter that had started everything so many years ago. Some believe that power comes from strength alone, Lily told the gathered representatives of 100 worlds. But I learned as a child that the greatest power comes from compassion, from reaching out to those who seem different and finding the connection that makes us all the same. In the audience, Verithax watched the girl she had once considered an intruder, now speaking words of wisdom that moved entire civilizations. The ancient dragon mother was very old now. Her scales faded and her fire dimmed, but her heart had never burned brighter than it did in this moment. Beside her sat Scorveth, who had become something she never expected, a friend who understood both grief and healing in ways few others could. "You were right to step aside that night," he said quietly. "When your hatchlings chose her," Verithax rumbled deep in her chest and replied, "I did not step aside because I believed in her. I stepped aside because I believed in them." She watched Corvus lean down to whisper something in Lily's ear, watched Solara adjust a glitter-covered pin on her ambassador uniform, watched Nethrix gently rest his massive head against her shoulder in a gesture of support. They saw something in her that I could not. Virithax continued. And they taught me that sometimes the fiercest thing a mother can do is trust her children, even when she does not understand. After the ceremony, Lily returned to her office, a room that visitors always remarked upon because it was covered in glitter, no matter how many times the cleaning staff tried to remove. And she kept a jar of sparkles on her desk, a gift from Scorvath that he had filled with scales from his lost children, so their memory could live on in the light. And on the wall hung a simple drawing, faded with age but still visible, showing a fierce dragon mother surrounded by 3 hatchlings and 1 small human girl with a bag of craft supplies. The drawing was titled simply, "My Family," because in the end, that was what the choosing had created. Not a political alliance or a cultural revolution, but something far more precious, a family built not on blood or species, but on love. One that had begun with a scared little girl who had nothing to offer except kindness, and that had been more than enough to change the entire galaxy.